whatever time zone you're in. All right, let's get started. I will not delay. Thank you all for joining us today. You are joining us during Career Month, which is our month-long focus series of events about making your career a focus, I should say focus one more time, of your 2023 goals. We know you start the year off hoping to make a change or grow in your role or do something different, and we are here to help. You are joining us today during our webinar entitled You Are Here, Making Any Job a Social Impact Job. I will not talk for too long because I know Caroline has a ton to say, but we will be using both the chat and the Q&A. If you have any questions at the end, please feel to add them as we go and we will get a chance to get to them. Caroline, I will let you introduce yourself and take it away.
Awesome. Okay, I'm so excited to be here today. This is my 5th webinar in partnership with the University of Chicago, and it's always a great time. But I do have a lot to say always, so let's dive into it. And let me know if at any point there are any problems with anything, right? So let's start with a quick overview of what we're going to be talking about today. So we're going to talk about why the social impact field is growing so rapidly. I'm going to share a framework for incorporating impact, whether or not you're currently employed. I'm going to share some mindset shifts that are essential for moving forward. And then, like Natalie mentioned at the end of our session today, I'm trying to leave a little bit of time for some Q&A at the end. I've put together a workbook for our session today, and I'm going to drop the link in the chat right now. This is always tricky because then people read all of it through, so just stay with me. And you'll be able to check it out later. If you're catching the recording of this, it is available. The workbook is available on my website, and here's the link. And then clearly I didn't catch the reminder I had left for myself to swap out the image of the workbook for the current one. So here we are. I knew I was going to forget that. All right. So, all right, everyone, let's try that again. Okay, so there's the workbook. And in that workbook, I've also included some extra resources and activities to help you get the most out of this workshop. So I think context is really important. And I wanted to share a little bit about who I am and why I'm here. So I come from a University of Chicago family. This is me on day 1 of orientation. My entire family went to the University of Chicago. My husband, brother, sister-in-law, and I all graduated from the college. And I spent about 5 years working for the university after graduation. I've been involved in the social impact work since my freshman year and was a student staff member at the University Community Service Center throughout undergrad. About 3.5 years ago, I started my own business, and I focus on coaching, training, and community for mission-driven leaders and organizations. So I do one-on-one coaching and career and leadership coaching. So people who are trying to transition careers, as well as leaders who are looking to develop their leadership skills. And then I am also the founder and facilitator of something called the Impact Leaders Incubator, which is a cohort-based leadership development program and community for women in social impact. We're in the middle of recruiting right now, so it's very top of mind. I also love facilitating events like this. So I do this work with businesses and universities around the world. And then one other thing is just, I have to make a plug for this. This is happening on Thursday. I regularly host networking events that are free and open to all. I call them Happy Hour Kirks. My last name is Hour Kirk, so I find it, helps that I have a great last name for this. And the next one's this Thursday. I'm going to drop the link to register now in the chat. And I've seen some of the names of folks in the group, so I know some folks here are already registered for that, so it's really exciting. All right, enough with the logistics. So let's dive in with what we're talking about today. Thank you, Laura. All right. I'm going to start with the 2 aha moments that I'd like you to take away from our time together today. So the first I'd like you to consider is you don't need permission to make an impact. So it can feel like your ability to make a dent on this world is limited by the job that you have. And so it can feel extra frustrating to want to work on making the world a better place, but not feeling like anyone will let you. I just want to name that, right? And I want to give you permission to just get started. And today, I'm going to share some tips on how to get that momentum going without waiting on anyone else, so that eventually, if it's what you want, you can have this as your job. The second big thing I want to take away from today is that it's okay to want a more fulfilling job, even if you have a job that's good right now. Wanting a job with more of an impact does not necessarily mean you'll be taking a pay cut. And finding work that's within your zone of genius, those contributions that only you can make, is a gift to the world. So I just want to name that as it's okay to want something more, even if you feel like you're in this great situation right now. We're going to spend the rest of our time together today digging into ways to make this happen, but I really wanted to share these takeaways at the top of our conversation to give them some time to sink in. All right, so I always come with a challenge. And so whatever your reason for being here today, first of all, I want to say thanks for joining us. And then secondly, I want to offer you this challenge. By the end of the workshop today, I'd like to invite you to identify one action that you can take to shift your career to one of greater impact and alignment with your goals. So what is one small step that you can take within the next 48 hours? And there's space in the workbook to write it down when you land on it. And Natalie, if I can ask you to just drop that in the chat again so that folks coming in later can check it out. All right, so with that, let's dive into it. So why are more folks looking for social impact jobs? I posted about this workshop on LinkedIn last Thursday, and the post got 20,000 views, okay? This is clearly a topic people are interested in, but why, right? What we have here is really an alignment of time, values, and priorities, right? So these past 2 years of the pandemic have made people realize that our time on this planet is very limited, and there is a very good reason to focus on life outside of work. We're also realizing that there are plenty of companies out there who are doing active harm to people and the planet. We're also just on the other end of things, seeing regulations. So specific regulations, especially in Europe, around climate impact. You'll see this especially in certain industries like fashion and food. So there's this response, more and more companies are starting to pay attention to this, right? We're also seeing customer demand, right? So more and more folks are looking to align their spending with companies that match their values. I should also mention that social impact is a bit of a buzzword. It's a little bit of a broad definition, and it's a catch-all term for a lot of different things. So ranging from nonprofits to corporate social responsibility, impact investing, lots more. And I just want to make a plug because there's no point in reinventing the wheel. So if you want to explore more about this, I encourage you to check out a previous workshop I did for the University of Chicago called Beyond Nonprofits. And I talk a lot about all of these different terms and sort of mapping this landscape of the terms we're using for social impact. And there's another workbook that's with that webinar that also has lots of helpful resources as well. Right, Rosalie wrote, and ESG. I talk about a lot of that here, right? ESG, impact investing, there's just in materiality assessment. I mean, so many different buzzwords and terms that mean really important things. But I think that we're starting to see social impact emerge as a term that's kind of this catch-all. So it's helpful to understand but I've found that a lot of people are using it to describe this idea of a career of greater purpose. So that brings us back to this basic premise for today, right? We spend a lot of time at work. So how can we spend that time doing something that's more fulfilling, that makes a greater impact, that fundamentally just makes the world a better place? So I want to present a three-part framework for incorporating impact. So the first part so it's 3 parts. We've got get clear, start where you are, keep moving forward, right? Okay. So excited about all the tabs, right? So getting started with our first part is get clear, right? So what do I mean by this? I mean, it's crucial to get clear on what it is that you actually want, right? So I've included some questions to kind of frame this on this slide and also in your workbooks. But I think it's really important to do some thinking of what you're even talking about when you talk about social impact. what does it mean to you? Why do you care, right? I think it can be really easy with these jargony terms to use them as a shorthand without really taking the time to dig into what do we even mean, right? Last year, I hosted a conversation for a group of women who were working in social impact, and we had a whole workshop on what are we talking about when we talk about social impact? What do we mean by that, right? How would we be able to tell that we were in a social impact job, right? It sounds really basic, but if one of the things that one of the challenges or one of the reasons why people feel so nebulous around like, I want a career of purpose or I want to make a difference with my career is that it's really, it can be challenging to figure out what does that even mean, right? Like, how would you be able to tell, right? How are you spending your days? So get clear on what it is that you want. Time spent on this kind of introspection is not a waste of time, right? I also want to encourage you to let go of this notion that there is a best or most effective way to make an impact. So our theme today is do what you can where you are with what you've got, right? And that applies here too. So there's no one mechanism of impact that is better or worse than any of the others, right? The key is finding the way that aligns best with your particular skill set and priorities. To put this more bluntly, you're not going to be an effective change agent if you're working in a way that you don't like to do, right? You may think that working directly with populations in need is the greatest way to make an impact. But if you realize that you don't actually enjoy working with people, you're going to be miserable, and that's not very effective, right? So my favorite tool for thinking about this is called the social change wheel. If you've seen this before, I'd love for you to drop this in the chat. I'm just super curious about how familiar folks are with this concept. It's gone through a couple of iterations. So now the classic version of this, which is what you see on this, is hard to find a high-res version of it. So apologies for the fuzziness, but I think it's really helpful because it succinctly captures a variety of different ways that we can make an impact through our work. And the beauty of this model is that there's a way for each of us to plug in, no matter what our resources, right? So if philanthropy is not accessible to you at the moment, then maybe socially responsible daily behavior, something as straightforward as choosing to recycle or choosing to get vaccinated or washing your hands after you go to the bathroom, right? That might be a way that you can contribute to making the world a better place, right? And there's a way for everyone to get involved. And as we'll talk about more in a moment, you can draw from this in your work life as well as in your personal life. All right, so another aspect of getting clarity, it's identifying what it is that you bring to the table, right? Oh, glad to see that some folks are familiar with it. Really curious to hear where you found out about it, because it's something that I used to keep photocopies of this in my office when I worked in the University Community Service Center and like hand it out to the students all the time. All right, so we want to get clear on what it is that you bring to the table too, right? So what are your skills? So we've got a couple of different categories of skills, and we're talking about industry expertise, right? So that's things like, I know how to be a good marketer. I know communication skills. I know how supply chains work. I know how to plan events, right? So those are industry expertise, right? But we've also got impact specific technical skills. And we're going to talk more about that in a moment, because if you're looking at any of these words on the slide and you're like, I have no idea what that means, awesome, right? That's a great opportunity to get curious and do some more exploration. But, some ideas of that might be knowing how to do materiality assessments, knowing how to do, CSR reporting, that kind of thing. And then we've got leadership skills, right? So the term soft skills, which you've probably heard of before, is becoming very outdated. We don't really use that term anymore because it's not a particularly helpful or descriptor, because they can be very difficult skills to execute effectively. So I like to use leadership skills instead. The clearer you can get in what skills you have, and what they are and how you can articulate them, the faster you'll go, right? And I know sometimes people come to me and they're like, okay, Caroline, but like, is there a master list of the possible skills? Like, so I can just figure out which ones I have? And the answer is yes. there are some really, so you can search around for lists of skills. There are, I think that I linked to some of them in the Beyond Nonprofit workbook as well, or if you can't find it, there are lists of skills online that I think can be really helpful in terms of getting some of this vocabulary. But another really great tip is to look at job descriptions, right? And look at the lists of skills that they ask for and figure out which can you claim, right? Which of these could I claim expertise in? The other thing I want to encourage here is to take an asset-based approach, right? So a lot of us tend to look at job descriptions and we use them as ways of screening ourselves out. But instead, I want to encourage you to think about, how might I claim this, right? How could I claim that I actually have that skill, right? What in ethics, of course, but like, how might I transfer my apply a previous experience to stand out in that way? I also want you to think about how your outside perspective helps you. How might the fact that you have this outside expertise outside of what we can traditionally call social impact, how might that help you? What does that allow you to do, or what other perspective does it give you? Okay, so then we're talking about other previous experiences. And then my favorite thing is, it's really important to develop what I like to call a career thesis statement. And this is something I do with my clients all the time. This is the fundamental piece of our work. I do talk about how to do this in a previous webinar, the Stand Out from the Crowd webinar with the University of Chicago. And so I encourage you to check out the details there. But it's really a summary of what skills, interests, and work preferences you're looking for in your next step. Think of it as an ideal job description instead of a job title that you're searching LinkedIn for. Okay, so with that, let's go to the next phase of next step of the framework, which is start where you are. So once you have clarity on what a social impact career looks like for you, then you can start working on actually getting there, right? So let's start with some strategies for if you're currently employed. So the big question here is, what can you do within your current job? So I think it's really important to mention, because sometimes we overlook the stuff that's closest to us, but you can make decisions that are within your own realm of responsibility, right? And you can align them with social impact practices, right? So you could pick vendors who demonstrate a commitment to impact, right? You could work with your catering services to make sure that you're donating food from events, right? You could make sure that you find the budget to pay your interns and not support unpaid internships within your workplace. That's a really great way of building building more inclusive and equitable practices, right? There's a really great resource that I linked to in the workbook from Project Drawdown. I can't pronounce this. Project Drawdown, and it talks about all these different job functions, things like marketing, communications, all kinds of different job functions. And it talks about how you can make any of these job functions a climate job, for example. And I think that's a really great resource for thinking about how you might incorporate more impact into the work that you're doing. Okay, so then the other thing that I just want to mention here is, consider how you show up, okay? So how might you, there are lots of great resources out there to find ways to make meetings more inclusive, right? To make sure that everybody's got a voice and is participating, you're sharing participation and decision-making, right? Find ways to incorporate anti-racist practices in your meetings and within the workplace. How do you show up differently, right? The other thing here is, considering how you might start a more formalized impact initiative. And I encourage you to go back to that social change wheel that we just talked about and think about ways that this might show up. Could you take your team on a volunteering day, or do something where you're starting where you are within your current role? If you want to take this a step further, there are definitely strategies for increasing impact within your organization. So again, it seems really straightforward, but who works on social impact at your company, right? What is your company already doing? Does your organization have a social impact team? Whose job is this, right? It's also really important to understand your company's approaches and initiatives, right? So what are they publishing about the, in the social impact space, right? And, you may have to do some digging, right? You may, maybe there isn't anything, right? But it does, I work with a lot of people who are social impact, who are CSR leaders within companies. And, they're telling me all the time about how hard it is to just tell anyone else in the organization that they exist, right? So just because you don't necessarily know about it doesn't mean it doesn't exist at your company, right? And especially if you're working at a Fortune 500 company, it absolutely exists there. It just might be very small, or it might be a person of like one or two, right? So just take a moment to figure out what is even going on, right? And then once you figured out what, if anything, is going on, the next question to ask yourself is, could this be your job, right? So I want to share a few terms and ideas for what this might look like. So if there already is a social impact team, a great first step is just to see if you can take one of the folks on that team out for coffee to learn more about what he, she, or they are working on. You could also see if you could shadow someone on that team for a day or two to get a better understanding of what this work entails, right? The next step past this might be to explore what making an internal transfer to that team might look like. And if there isn't a social impact team, that's where this concept of job crafting comes in, right? So that's where you start shifting your current scope of work to focus on work that's more aligned with your goals, with the end result of eventually having an updated job description that formally recognizes this shift of position. The key here is to illustrate the business case for why this shift needs to happen. And so on that end, I just want to mention, some really great resources in the handout around making the business case for social impact, right? There's lots of people talking about this online right now. But I just want to mention that this job crafting concept it happens all the time. I have a lot of clients who have made this happen within their current organizations where they've just started doing it, right? Or starting to shift that conversation and eventually, crafting a job that allows them to do this work all the time. But the key here is to really make sure that you're emphasizing the business case for it, right? Like, why is this important? And we'll talk about more of that in a second. If you want to find the space to experiment, test things out, see if you like it, right? There's definitely some options as well. So a lot of larger companies offer employees the option of paid time off to volunteer. So that's definitely one way to go, right? You might get a certain number of days to volunteer per year. And that can be a really great way to kind of test things out. Some professions, and you probably already know about this is one of your professions, but there are professions that incorporate pro bono work into their professional standards, right? So you can continue to explore ways that can be more aligned with the work you want to do. I've also had some clients have what are called secondment positions, right? Where their company basically allows them to work for another organization for a specified period of time. As basically a donation to a nonprofit, right? So they're basically paying the employees time to work work for a nonprofit or social impact organization as a way of contributing particular professional skills. And that can be a really great way of testing out new experiences and whether you actually are interested in any of these things. It can be great to join, or some companies offer sabbatical programs where you could design a sabbatical where you can explore some of these ideas, pursue a social impact project. There are organizations that plan impact trips that you could join as part of a sabbatical, and to make it even easier. You could join a nonprofit board, and I included that this is a great perk to negotiate as part of taking a new job. So the perk being paid time off to go participate in board meetings or funding to travel to board meetings. So I did this when in my last salary job, I asked for support to serve on an impact, well, it was actually called the Impact Conference, but to serve on a conference board. So I was able to take the time during my workday to attend conference calls. And then, they paid for me to go to 2 board meetings a year in person, right? So this can be a really great thing to negotiate, and it benefits the company as well as you. Consider exploring initiatives like 1% for the planet, and definitely encourage you to Google that if that's not something that's familiar to you. Okay, so I want you to keep in mind that to not assume that it's not possible because you haven't seen anyone do it before, right? It just may be that no one had this idea yet, and that it might be impossible for sure, but it also is more likely that just no one's asked, right? And it may be harder to be the first and to work on developing these policies yourself, but it's a great way to lead by example. It's a really great project you can talk about in future interviews or other settings, right? And it really shows your initiative to really like step out and say, I've figured out how to make this work. Companies are motivated to retain employees. It's really expensive to replace an employee. So they are motivated to keep you, right? It's expensive to replace you. You have a lot of institutional knowledge. And it's like for high performers, they want to keep, to a certain extent, they want to keep people happy, right? So this could be a way to, depending on your political institutional capital, you may have some leverage here. The other thing I just want to mention though, is you have to frame your request in terms of the company's priorities, right? So at the end of the day, most organizations that we're talking about are businesses that are designed to make a profit at some point, right? So you need to frame your requests and how they benefit the company too. It's not just you, right? So how do we make the business case for this? And then the last thing I just want to mention is it's crucial, no matter where you are, to keep track of your successes, right? So what are the stories you can tell about the work you're doing? Who can you loop in and bring and connect, right? But making sure to keep track of the successes, right? And I would just say that it's always helpful to keep track of your successes, whether or not you're job searching. If any of these ideas sound interesting to you, I definitely encourage you to do more research online. Just literally typing any of these terms in will pull up a whole bunch of resources that can help you figure this out. Okay, so what steps should you take if you aren't currently employed? And I should mention that the steps I'm about to share are helpful even if you're currently working, right? So in this situation, it's even more important to spend time figuring out what it is you want. I also have to emphasize that figuring out what you want is not the same thing as having a specific job title that you're searching for. It's very much about getting clear on the skills that you want to use and the way you want to make an impact. I do have to make a plug that it can be helpful to work with a career coach on this process because you will likely make a lot more progress a lot faster when you have a sounding board to get some perspective. The University of Chicago Alumni Career Program Office, I changed your title every single time I mention it, has a really great list of career coaches on their website. You might, maybe Natalie, you can drop that in the chat too. But there's lots of career coaches out there and lots of people doing work in this field. So it's great to find the person that you have a great fit with, but you can go a lot faster if you have a sounding board who can help you navigate this process. And then also you can check out some of my other webinars where I share tips about this to get clarity. So if you're not currently employed, I want to really encourage you to find ways to take action no matter how small they feel. These small, consistent steps lead to big progress, and they can give you a space to practice your skills and test things out. But even more importantly, it can give you a sense of agency, okay? So much of the job search process is completely out of your control, and it involves waiting on other people and looking for ways that you can keep moving forward. And I want to make sure that it's moving forward without throwing a flurry of applications to jobs you're not interested in. Finding ways to keep moving forward will help you keep your sanity, okay? after I graduated from grad school in 2010, when the last economy was falling apart, right? I applied to 78 jobs after graduation. Okay. And so I hear you on, it is very disheartening to just throw things out there and keep hearing no over and over again. So we're constantly looking for ways to have agency in this process. Okay. So that's how you're going to keep your sanity is just to keep finding ways for you to take action that are within your own control. We're going to talk about that. So one great way to do this is to fill in your knowledge gaps, right? So spend some time learning the lingo, right? So if any term that don't be afraid to Google it, okay, and figure it out, right? So there is so much free information on the internet, and I want you to be curious. So notice what things you don't know and take the time to research them. It is so easy to just skim over something or skip over it if you don't know that word or if it's unfamiliar. But really, really take the time to dig in and be curious, because that's how you keep learning, right? It's like learning a completely different language and trying to get the context clues and do the research to figure it out. I want to encourage you to consider your information diets. Do not, I tried to Google influencer diet. That did not generate very good results on the internet. So don't recommend that, but let's call it an information diet, right? There are a lot of people who are really active on LinkedIn and who post lots of incredibly helpful resources. And you can pick up a lot just by reading their posts regularly, seeing who comments, what they like, what they reshare. And to that end, really just encourage you to learn to love LinkedIn, right? I know a lot of people don't like LinkedIn, and it's, not the most, it's not the, as entertaining as maybe some of Instagram and cat videos or TikTok or whatever. But there is a lot of really great information there. And there's some really helpful active LinkedIn groups that share resources, job leads, connections, and it can really be beneficial. I know I keep making plugs to other webinars, but I think it's really helpful because I share a lot of tips for getting the most out of LinkedIn in this webinar on standing out from the crowd, because I think that I don't know how to say this in a elegant way, but I would say that the bar for LinkedIn is really low. Okay. And a lot of people really hate LinkedIn. So if you just do a little bit more of engagement with LinkedIn, you're absolutely standing out from the crowd. And there's just so much information there that can be really helpful. And you can meet some really cool people online. So I just want to encourage you to think about that. Right. Yeah, Laura, it's absolutely true. Laura, I met on LinkedIn, right? And then I just want to name the elephant in the room, which is that, yes, you may need to go back to school or get a certificate or get a master's degree. There is a big demand for real, actual technical expertise in this field. Okay. And so you may need, if that's the direction you're going in, there's no substitute for actually getting those technical skills other than experience, right? So you may need to explore some of those options. I include a link of 25 different sustainability certifications in the workbook, so you can check that out as well. I also have to say that with the way the job market is heading right now, you may need to, you are likely to, unless you're working in big tech, getting a master's at some point is going to be pretty essential for almost everybody in the job market based on the inflation of job descriptions at the moment. So if that's something that you're on the fence about, definitely encourage you to do that exploration to find that as well. Okay, so lots of words. So I want to make sure that we get to some question and answer. So we're gonna keep moving to this question of how do you get experience, right? So there are some opportunities for contractor project work, right? You may find a way to find a contract within, say you're interested in accounting or something. Maybe you can start exploring some opportunities there are lots of calls for contractors or project-based experiences. And that might be a way to kind of tiptoe your way into getting this exposure. But my favorite tip is to start a side project. It can be anything. The idea is to try something out and commit to building it. So some of the most common examples of this are a newsletter, right? So committing to sharing a regular newsletter. It could be weekly, it could be bi-weekly, it could be monthly. It doesn't really matter so much as you're consistent and trying, right? And it's okay if your following is like 10 people, right? What you're doing is building a body of work, and that's a really big deal. You could start a podcast similarly. And that can generate a lot of really great connections as well. You could share resources on LinkedIn, like interesting articles, or just kind of commit to regularly sharing things that are exciting to you. You could talk about you could think in public, right? So asking questions, posing discussion prompts, that kind of thing. I share a resource about this in the workbook as well. But my favorite tip on this is what I like to call an informational interview project. Okay, so that's where you commit to sharing the results of your informational interview with a broader audience. So I posted a screenshot of a really great example of this. This person interviewed a large group of leaders about the topic of burnout. And this research project offered a really great reason for her for people the people that she reached out to say yes to her when she approached them about an informational interview. So then she compiled what she learned into this easy to digest summary that she can then share all over the internet. And it therefore increased the expertise and credibility of herself, as well as all the other people that she interviewed for this project. And she got to make lots of great connections and share this knowledge further, right? So this is a win-win for everyone involved, right? It is much more appealing for the expert that you're approaching to participate in something like this than to respond to someone who just emails and says, hey, I was wondering if I could pick your brain, right? By the way, please never use that phrase, I want to pick your brain, okay? Nobody wants to say yes to that, right? Nobody wants to say yes to, sure, you can pick my brain, right? If you're reaching out to experts who are paid for their time, right? Picking your brain is not an attractive request, right? And so if you're not paying them for their time for a variety of legitimate reasons, right? Finding another way to help benefit them is going to be really helpful, right? And an example like this, where she's putting together this document, spreading the word, all of these other people get, comments on their LinkedIn, they get more LinkedIn connections, they get more credibility, everybody wins. That's a really great way to make it mutually beneficial. The other thing that I like about this project is that it gives you the chance to develop other skills. So you can play around with Canva and learn how to use Canva really well as you put this kind of PDF together. You can learn how podcasting works. You can pick up skills around email marketing, right? If you're making a newsletter, you're able to demonstrate a lot of initiative as you teach yourself these skills, and you benefit from the job hunt process as you go along, right? And these are absolutely skills that you can talk about in an interview, right? They are valuable skills, even if no one's paying you. And who knows, maybe you'll catch this entrepreneurial bug and turn this side project into a full-time job. The big takeaway here is to find ways to get started and develop some of these skills without waiting for your next job to start. And many of these ideas are doable for just the cost of your time, which is not free, right? But they don't require a significant outlay of capital, right? And they can reap huge dividends. I started a newsletter when I was in 2012 or no, 2015. And just for fun, to kind of share some cool articles and resources that I liked to read. And that newsletter has grown significantly larger over time. And through that newsletter, I've gotten lots of clients, I've gotten lots of connections, made friends. It's worked out really well, right? That wasn't, my intention was just to kind of share what I was already reading with lots of other people. Okay, so my last tip here is to get clear on your story, okay? You are in charge of connecting the dots of your life, right? You need to feel like you have a compelling narrative that knits these pieces together. Nobody else can do this for you. I do this with clients all the time, right? Where it's like, we're trying to knit these pieces together, because if you aren't convinced of your story, no one else is going to be either, right? So practice articulating these connections between what you've done previously and where you're trying to go. there is a way to connect any set of dots, right? I am not a math magician by any stretch of the imagination, but I do know that any two dots is a straight line, right? So you get to make this trajectory, right? You are in charge of the story, but you are the one who needs to do the work. And again, a career coach can be really helpful with this process. All right. So let's come to part 3 of our framework. So keep moving. All right. Clarity comes through action, not through overthinking, right? And I have to use the University of Chicago image here because I think that this was really a thing. This was an experience that I had, right? Clarity comes through action, not through thinking about it, right? I know at the University of Chicago, we care deeply about theory, and that's great. And theory is awesome, right? But learning is experiential, not linear. You're never starting from scratch, right? You absolutely need to take info in, process it, figure out how it integrates into everything else, right? This is really, really important. It comes through action. We've got to take steps, okay? All right, this one's a doozy, okay, friends? But the answer to what should I do with my life is not sitting in a book that you just haven't found yet, okay? You haven't figured it out yet because it's something we iterate and get towards. It's not discovered under a rock or in a book or from someone else, right? Like you have to figure this out for yourself. And I know that you know this intellectually, right? But when we come from such an academic background, from seeing books and other people as the experts, it can feel really challenging to be like, okay, well, maybe the answer is out there. Like, I know how to do research. Let me just keep researching, right? But research is the most seductive form of procrastination, okay? It's super, super important to keep moving, right? You're going to get a heck of a lot farther with scrolling through LinkedIn and interacting with different comments and learning different things than you are going to spend a million, like all this time just thinking about it, right? Okay, I feel very strongly about this, so let me keep moving. The other 2 elements of keep moving are, they have some overlap with what we talked about already, but it's worth mentioning again. Follow the news, right? It's important to stay current on what's going on in the field. Consider skill building, right? I see some people are dropping resources in the chat, which is awesome, right? If you're there are lots of technical spaces within social impact, so definitely check those out if you're interested in more of the scientific end of things. But if you're currently employed, make sure to ask for professional development funding. Don't leave that money on the table. It can also be especially helpful to look for opportunities that will expand your network, not just help build your skill set. Connecting with actual people is really, really important and has the potential to benefit you in ways that you can't anticipate, like, which is the most annoying thing for people who like research, right? I have to make a special shout out for cohort-based things in general. I mean, I run a leadership development program for women in social impact. There are others out there, but this idea of building both skills and networks is really, really important. And then again, disconnect from what you think you should be doing or this best way to make an impact, right? That will keep you stuck. Clarity comes through action. And the last thing I want to say here is that this approach applies to more than just social impact, right? You could take all of what I just said here and swap out other terms, right? Like, how do I get a job in accounting without having gotten started, right? Like, how do I get a job in marketing without ever having gotten started, right? It's not about social impact. What we're talking about is how do we figure out what we don't know? Okay, so and then don't forget to celebrate wins, right? This is so easy this is so hard for us to remember that I didn't even include it on my notes. I only have it on my slide here, but it's crucial to celebrate wins, right? Like, let's celebrate the successes. Okay, so quick recap. Do I even have that? All right, yeah. We talked about the crucial mindset shifts necessary for creating a career of purpose. You don't need permission, and it's okay to want a more fulfilling job. We talked about the social change wheel and how there are many different ways to make an impact. We talked about some of the reasons why people are looking for more purpose. I shared this 3-part process for incorporating impact. We talked about getting clarity on what it is that you want. And I shared some strategies for starting where you are, whether you're currently employed or not. And then I finally encourage you to keep moving and remember to celebrate wins. So as we transition to some question and answers, I want to encourage you to jot down one action that you would like to take within the next 24 to 48 hours to move closer to an impact career. That could be reach out to someone. It could be signing up for a newsletter. It could be finding some time to do some more research or talk to someone, right? You can also register for the happy hour that I will try to find a link to in the workbook. Actually, it's carolineauerkirk.com or talktocaroline.com/meetfriends. For more information, be sure to download this workbook. Check out my website, some of the other webinars that I've done, and consider reaching out if you'd like some other reports or other ways to make connections. I'm so excited that I can't even finish that sentence. All right. The last thing I want to say is, this is my 5th workshop for the University of Chicago. So definitely check out some of those other opportunities. And with that, time for questions. I'm happy to answer lots of different things, except for why is Steve in the dishwasher? I don't know. All right. I did see one question that I really wanted to address. And then maybe Natalie, if you've seen any of the other good questions in here too. But someone asked me a question of, how do you know when you're done researching and should keep moving? I love this. Okay. You're never done, right? And you're never done researching and you're never done moving. So, I think that's always the challenge, right? But it's learning is experiential, right? So what we have an experience, right? Or you can think about this as the scientific method, right? You have a hypothesis, you do some research or you do some sort of experiment and you get more information. Then you look at the results of that and you integrate it with what you've got already and you make a new hypothesis, right? And then you keep iterating forward. We do this all the time, right? In the lab through the pure scientific method, but also through things like burning your hand, right? By getting something hot out of the oven, right? You get something hot out of the oven, you take a moment to think about like, why did that happen? Like, why did I burn myself, right? The learning about using a pot holder doesn't come from the action of getting burned. It comes from the opportunity to think about how you might do things differently. So it's a constant process, right? And I know a lot of the folks here are excited about learning. So, it doesn't have to be miserable, right? How can we make it enjoyable and exciting? Natalie, did you see any other good questions?
I did. Yeah, we had one that came in before the event that I think you touched on, but I'd love to hear more on, which is, how do you convince, if you're someone who's in a current position and you're trying to make social impact more of the role that you're already in, how do you convince your boss that this is something that you are able to do? I think you talked about, looking for more resources, but how are you able to convince your sort of people who manage you that this sort of change is going to be impactful for not just your work, but for your company as a whole?
Okay. So there's like 2 levels, and I think both of them are applicable to this. One is, how do you convince your boss that you have the skills to do this? And then also, how do you convince your boss that this is an important thing to be doing in the first place? I think in both cases, we've got this question of what's the goal of this project, right? What is how can this benefit the business, right? I think always in these settings, it's really important to understand how what the priorities are of your organization, right? And what does success look like for the organization? So how can you tie the work that you're doing how can you translate that into success for the organization, right? So if the goal is make more money, right? How can you make a case for what you're trying to do that's rooted in this is going to generate revenue, right? If the goal is get more, more customers, right? How can you translate this into language that speaks to that, right? So understanding the motivations and priorities of the organization, really important. I should say that also there's a lot of stuff. One of my friends, Jessica Radpravar, who some of you might know, she runs an organization called Reconsidered, and they have a really great behavior change playbook on their website that has some really cool resources around how we nudge behavior to like how we influence other people. And she also has a cohort-based course called about change makers, right? So how do you lead change within an organization? And I think another cohort of that is running this spring. So that might be something else to check out.
Thank you. And I think we had a question earlier that I think is super interesting because you talked about getting that contract work. And I think a lot of questions people have is how do you exemplify some transferable skills? So I think it can be easy, especially in this age of sort of like AI-led or ATS-led job applications or applications for this stuff. How do you point out the skills that are transferable so someone doesn't just look and say, oh, you know what, they have no background in this, I'm going to say no matter what? How do you kind of exemplify those transferable skills?
Yeah, so this is, I think, where an example of like a project that you're in control of is really helpful, right? So like nobody can stop you from writing that newsletter. And now you have a newsletter that you say, I know how to run a newsletter, right? I think also, and you can do that for free, right? Like MailChimp allows you to have up to 250 people on your newsletter for free, you know, and I'm sure there are other resources out there as well. I think also it's about, yeah, awesome. Thank you, friends, for the shout. I used to, in full disclosure, I used to work for Reconsidered, so that's why I'm a big fan. But I think, you know, it's a matter of finding, you have like, no matter, okay, so I get really excited about this, but the bottom line of it is, it may be obvious to you, but it might not be obvious to someone else. And so you have to be the person connecting the dots for other people, right? You have to be explicit. I read cover letters all the time, and it's always surprising to me how people write cover letters, but then don't mention how all of this previous experience is relevant for the job that they're applying for, right? So they'll write these cover letters and they'll say, I'm amazing at this and I'm amazing at that, which is great. I love the confidence, but why does that matter, right? So making sure that you're explicit about how that amazingness is going to be relevant for this job, right? Whether it's contract work or other stuff. I think for contract work, it can be really helpful to have a portfolio of, you know, and show some examples of your work as well, right? So that's, again, where starting a project that you're in control of is going to be really helpful.
Awesome. And thank you for everyone who's sharing in the chat, and please feel free to submit any questions. I think we have time for one or two more. I think one that I saw earlier, let me make sure that I'm explaining it correctly. So give me one second. Yeah, all your comments are filtering in, and I'm trying to find the one that I was talking
so many
about
good
earlier.
things here. I love this. Save the chat.
Sure. Yeah. So I guess there was one question about sort of turning those informational interviews into something more. I think you talked about really good resources of like how you can use what you learn in informational interviews, but in terms of reaching out to your connections that you're all joining in on LinkedIn and you know, meeting new people, how do you take that next step into saying, you know, this is something that I'm interested in and I know you're in this space. Can you help? Like how can I use my network to make this possible?
Yeah. So it really is about like, here's getting it. I mean, I think that there's some really great examples. So I linked to one in the chat. It is a little bit tricky to find, like, it's not like there's a hashtag for this or anything like that, but I think this goes back to that question of how do you make this mutually beneficial, right? So why should someone say yes to you, right? Because we're busy, right? And again, if you're, you know, if someone is an expert who's paid for her time, then time spent talking to you is not, you know, is time that she could be spending doing something else, right? So how do you make it mutually beneficial, right? And I think it really becomes an ask, right? Like it's there. I think that there are examples of this in, I don't know where I've talked about this before, but it's this question of, here's who I am, here's why I reached out to you, right? And what's exciting about your work, right? Here's the ask. Most people bury the ask like way down. And I talk about this in the networking webinar, right? Where it's like, make it easy to say yes, right? How do we make it easy to say yes to you, right? What's the question and how do I make it easy to say yes? And then also, making it easy to participate, right? So that could look like sending a calendar link or, or giving some sort of example. But I would say don't be afraid of reaching out to people, right? Because you never know, right? And I mean, people love doing this, right? And also don't take it personally when someone says no, right? So, I mean, it's kind of that balance, right? Buy people virtual coffees, make it fun, right? Find a way for this to be mutually beneficial, I think can be really helpful. And, and if that's not accessible to you at the moment, then consider like, how might you do a trade, right? Like, or how could you do something, looking at what someone's sharing, like, how can you have plenty to contribute, right? No matter what level you are in your career or where you are. I talk about this a lot in that networking webinar where it's like, don't discount yourself and what you have to bring to the table, but also make sure it's win-win.
Amazing. And I think we have one question that I found really interesting, which is, often in when you have this idea and you're working so hard at what you're already doing, it's hard to kind of take the time to make the focus important. So what is your advice on inspiring yourself, your teams, your staff members to embrace, focusing on these priorities instead of just saying, I'm going to continue what I always do and not pay mind to, something that I'm more passionate about? How do you, I guess say, how do you make space for this time to focus on what you actually want to do?
Ooh, I mean, I think it's really important to consider what the trajectory is going to be like if you don't, right? I know it's really cliche, but that idea of like, you're going to, a year from now, you're going to wish you had already started. Right. And I think that's where this like small, it doesn't have to be perfect, right? One of my life mottos is the perfect is the enemy of the good, right? You don't need to be an expert in all the things, right? Like I make this joke all the time, but like my slides, I am not an expert in making slides and I don't care to be, right? Like you don't need to be an expert in all the things, but thinking about what things you are curious about, even if you're not good at them yet, right? And creating some ways to get some small wins can be really helpful. But also, thinking about what do you need to make time for now so that, in the future you have something to reap, right? Like to reap what are some seeds you can plant now that you can harvest later. And then the other thing is like, I think I said this in the thing, but opportunity comes in ways you can and cannot expect, right? And you just don't know where it's going to lead. And I've had such cool experiences with connecting people at random on the internet, and you just don't know where it's gonna lead you, and kind of deciding to play that game and enjoy the process. It doesn't have to be miserable.
And I think one final one, we talked a lot about how this can be a process that takes some time, right? You're going to be doing a lot of focusing, doing a lot of thinking, maybe building out your portfolio and your experience. How do you stay motivated? How do you, stay motivated to keeping up with this and not giving in to, what my passion can be something that I don't align my work with? How do you keep the drive?
I think it can be really helpful to look at other people who are doing inspiring things and making sure that this information diet, this influencer diet takes into account people who are inspiring, and looking, finding ways to keep finding those beacons of enthusiasm, as opposed to look for evidence that it is working, right? That's really, really crucial.
Thank you so much for being here, Caroline. I really appreciate it. As always, she has explained that she has done tons of webinars for us and they're always a grand slam. So we are very happy to have you back. And I saved the chat. The chat will be saved. So I will make sure that all the resources and links that others have shared will be in there, including the ones that Caroline had shared. They will be in the follow-up email with you all. But thank you for joining us, everyone. We really appreciate it. And have a great rest of your day.
Awesome. Connect with me on LinkedIn, and I look forward. Come to the happy hour, Kirk, and I look forward to connecting with you all. All right. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Bye, guys.